Good morning. How are we doing today? This is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome back to another video. And in today's video, I want to introduce you to Falcon. So Falcon is a new piece of software, and if you've never used it before, I wanted to simply show it to you, show you kind of what it is, how it's useful, and let you see if this is something that you can see using in your own off-table study and workflow. So without further ado, let's start walking through the software. So Falcon is a PC-only software that allows you to get extremely granular when it comes to flop exploration. So I want to run you through the UI first so we kind of get a general feel for what's going on here. So on the left side of this half, we have our range and our hits, and we'll talk about what hits are in a moment. On the right, we have their range and their hits. On the far right, we have the board selector, so we can either look at general flops or we can look at very specific flops by digging in here. And then over in the middle is where we have the really important stuff. This is going to be the matrix that we can really dive into and start getting very granular when it comes to our analysis. So let's just say that we're going to start with a very simple example. And this is how I would set up a problem in Falcon and look to start finding a solution. So say that I have my range over here on the left. And by the way, it's very simple to select hands very quickly. Just kind of pop into the matrix, click around. Everything that's red is yours. And you also have quick selectors too, so if you right click here you get other options. So if you want to quickly add any pair or any ace or any two Broadway cards, makes life very simple when trying to select hands and or ranges. And yes, you can do individual hands here if you want, but for this moment I'm just going to do this as our range, this is our opponent's range, and we're going to do some general exploration. So as always, start by selecting hands and or ranges. Next, you want to start by selecting hits. We're going to do a full video in the future all about what a hit or a miss is and how to kind of generalize strategy around that. But for the time being, just going to do a very broad strokes here. Essentially with hits, I'm going to be selecting all the hand strengths and hand categories that I think are strong enough to continue with on the flop. So for this moment, obviously this is a very set miney range. I'm going to include obviously the super strong stuff, quads, full houses, and trips. I'm going to include overpairs because if I have tens on a low board, obviously going to be continuing a large chunk of the time. The rest of the stuff doesn't really apply to me, and if I catch a flush draw, probably not going to continue a ton of the time. It's probably going to be a pretty weak flush draw, but straight draws will almost certainly continue for at least one. And I'll do some basic stuff like underpair, and you notice that with these kind of hands, there's actually lots of, and actually just in general, there's a lot of different ways to make two pair, right? You can have two pair with yours as the overpair. You can have it where you kind of have this like middle-ish thing. So I'm going to select a lot of two pairs. Chances are I'm going to be continuing for at least one card when I have two pair. That's just typically how I tend to float and peel off on flops. So these are my hits over on the left. Next, I want to select my opponent's hits. So thinking about the kind of hands that they are going to continue with if they hit the flop, what are they not going to be folding with? Well, I think a lot of the time, I think this is probably pretty fair. Top pair, better, yes. Flush draws, straight draws, yes. And I believe gut shots as a hand category are coming soon. I just don't think they're out right this moment. And do I think there's anything else they're going to continue with? Well, probably 1.5 pair. And what this means is, say someone has kings on an ace-high board, right? That is 1.5 pair. It's not second pair, but it's definitely not first pair, so it's 1.5. So I think that's probably pretty fair. A middle pair, because based upon the way they would catch middle pair, I think that's pretty strong. So that's what I'm going to consider them hitting with in this scenario. So again, step 1, select your range and their range. Step 2, select the hits, both for you and for them. Step 3 is to actually start analyzing things. So for this, I'm just going to do a general 100%, and this means it's going to look at all flops. And down here, I'm just going to click 1,000 more flops. I'm just going to do that real quick. Boom. Excellent. And I'm going to do it one more time as well because I like to add as many flops as possible. When I'm actually doing this in my off-table exploration, I tend to use at least 2,000 or 3,000 flops, but this will work for the time being. And we notice that obviously because we're looking at all flops, everything meets that criteria. So this right here, just don't be confused. This does not mean that we're only analyzing a 964 board. This is just a proofer to make sure that the flop is actually meeting the criteria that you were looking at. Obviously with 100% flop, this will meet any sort of flop criteria. You'll see what I mean in a moment when we do something more precise. So down below, what the heck are we looking at here? You may be looking at this matrix and saying this is incredibly confusing. Well, at first this may seem confusing, but I assure you it's not too bad. So you notice here what this means is that 41% of the time we both hit. Remember, a hit just means that we have one of these and they have one of these at the same time, so that's how often we're both hitting. 28% of the time only they hit, 20% of the time only we hit, 11% of the time we're both missing, and here is just everything added up for us to be nice and easy. So what are we really seeing here? Well, one of the big things when you are set mining, or you're going to be playing a suited connector, or you're going to be playing some hand that has a lot of implied odds, or you're hoping has a lot of implied odds, this is one of the first places you want to be looking. Where are we both hitting? And when we both hit, are we doing really well or not really well? Well, because we selected a lot of these kind of like dumpy two pairs, where obviously when they catch two pair, it's going to be pretty darn strong and stronger than us, you notice that we only have 30% equity. So that's what we're seeing here is, okay, how often when we both hit, what does that look like? And then what is the average equity for that? Our average equity when we both hit based upon the qualifiers we chose is that that we are going to have 30% equity, they're going to have the other 70, and there we are. And this shows you the general breakdown, right? You notice a large chunk of the time we're going to have very low equity, and some chunk of the time we're going to have a lot of equity, but it's not happening all that often. So this is a scale along the bottom of this histogram from 0 to 100%. This is important, and then this red line just gives us the average. And you notice that when we both miss, again, 66%, and that makes a lot of sense, right? Based upon the qualifiers that we gave them for quote-unquote hitting, when they don't hit, they most likely have something like ace high. And obviously our pair is going to beat ace high, and we're going to have decent equity against that, which is why we have so much equity when we both miss. So this is a bare, broad strokes look at what Flop Falcon can do for you. Now, over the next bunch of weeks, we're going to talk about how to use this from a strategic point of view, right? So right now, we're just doing a bare bones, this is how to use the software. But in the future, we're going to look at, okay, how do we use Flop Falcon to answer questions like, should we be set mining in this situation? Should we play a suited connector here? Should we call with ace-x suited? Should we 3-bet preflop with ace-queen? How should we be bluff c-betting? All those kind of questions we can answer very easily with Flop Falcon, but it's one of those where I need to show you kind of what the software looks like and how it operates before we can jump into the really technical stuff and answering things in a very strategic way. So again, this is the bare broad strokes look at it, but I also want to show you kind of the flop selectors. So we can go over here and we can select different kinds of flops. So these are just the bare bones basic ones. Notice we have paired and suited, we have trips, we have dynamic flops, we have monotone flops. We can also look specifically at paired ones made a bunch of different ways. We can look at straighty kind of boards, and we can also do fully custom selections. So let's just say we wanted to do, let's do a paired just so I can, a basic first so I can explain something to you. So let's say we wanted to look only at monotone boards. So we'll select monotone, do 1,000 more flops. Give it a moment. Boom. Excellent. And we're going to click it one more time. I know it takes a little moment, but what are we going to do with 3 or 4 seconds? Just going to wait and let it chug up. Excellent. So a couple of things that I like to note here. First and foremost is we notice that 5% of flops are actually going to be monotone. A lot of people don't know that, and this is something very good to know. And again, this is something bare bones and basic that Flop Falcon can teach you, even though it's definitely not the main thing that you're supposed to be getting from the software. It's just a nice little added bonus to get this kind of information. And again, we're not looking specifically at ace-5-3 of hearts. In fact, this is just a proofer. So this is just making sure that the actual flop is meeting the criteria that you set. So this is really good, especially when you're doing fully custom stuff, to make sure that everything is doing what you want it to do. So in this situation, again, when the board comes monotone, it tells us exactly, okay, based upon both hitting, we're doing that 46% of the time, and on average, we're going to have 38% equity when that happens. When only they hit, well, that's going to happen 37% of the time, and on average, we're going to have obviously lower equity because we're not hitting at all, and we're going to have 22%. And when we both miss, you notice that we're actually doing very well at roughly 75% equity. So this is how you break it down this way. And you may be looking over here and you notice all these kind of like bar charty kind of things. Doug Hall, the guy who created this, is extremely nerdy, but also extremely talented when it comes to doing this kind of data visualization. So there's a lot of stuff happening all at once. And you notice that there's 2 general numbers here, right? If we look at, say, trips, there's a 15% on top of it and a 27% underneath it. You notice that that's kind of all over the place. What this means is the number on top is showing you how often this range in general is going to catch trips. The 27% says, okay, of the times that they hit, what density of hits is going to be trips. So overall, this is going to catch trips 15% of the time. If we're only looking at hits, trips make up 27% of that density, which is very important information. So this is the general, and then you could also go into custom and you can do very, very refined things. So say you only wanted to explore flops that were ace or king high, and you wanted to look at them that were, I don't know, unpaired for sure. Okay, so we're going to untick paired. Good. So we're going to do that. Do 1,000 more flops, and we're going to keep our eye over here just to make sure that that's meeting our criteria, right? Again, this is our proofer right here. Good, and we're going to notice how often flops come ace or king high, which is very, very important for us to know for trying to do general, how often are dry boards going to happen, right? So we could say, okay, well, maybe instead of it coming ace or king high with a queen or a jack, we could say, okay, let's just remove those cards. Okay, and then we're doing 1,000 more flops and get really, really granular. And you notice that the number drops down a little bit, and if you want to get really precise, you might click this a couple times. And again, that's typically why I click 1,000 more flops like 2 or 3 times, just so it kind of weeds through this, gets me a little bit more precise. The bigger the sample, more precision you're going to have. Good, and you notice that the flop proofer is doing exactly what it needs to do. Lets us see, okay, we did pick the right kind of board that we're looking to explore, and then we get to see exactly how our range compares versus their range in a hit versus hit way on this exact kind of texture. So again, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at Flop Falcon to answer some of the kind of questions that lots of players have. Again, should we set mine? A lot of pre-flop questions, but we're also looking at some post-flop things. You may be wondering, why the heck are we using flop software to analyze pre-flop? Well, a lot of that is because when we can understand how certain hands connect on the flop, we can actually change our pre-flop range in a more profitable way. Not in a results-oriented way that because the flop came exactly this, now all of a sudden we can do something pre-flop. No. It's actually saying, okay, this is a situation where I know that my kind of hand is going to connect this way, so could I add more of those hands? Or is my opponent missing so often that I can add certain hands into my pre-flop range instead? This is the kind of off-table exploration that allows you to become very, very technical, and trust me, that's going to be a huge benefit to you in the long run. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully this gives you a really good idea on what Flop Falcon is useful for and how to use the software overall. And if you're interested in picking up your own copy, you can do so at redchippoker.com/flopfalcon, or just do a Google search for Flop Falcon. It'll pop right up, no problems whatsoever. So hopefully you enjoyed. If you have any comments or questions on this software, let me know. If there's a ton of really technical questions, I'll let Doug know so Doug can come in and answer them. But ultimately, hopefully this lets you see, is this the software that's right for me, and would this help me study off table? And trust me, the answer is yes, but it is going to take a little bit of work. It is going to take a little bit of time, but trust me, that's the stuff that pays off huge in the long run. So I'll see you back later. We'll talk about how to use Flop Falcon in some really strategic ways. In the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.